Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia, and with me, as always, is the accelerated Jennifer Woolman.
I did have my cafecito.
Just
Hello,
now.
everybody.
Accelerated and caffeinated. I love it. I love it.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So today I know Fernando's like, what are you going to talk about? What is the subject? So today we're going to talk about a little bit about an event that happened, I think it was the end of January or the beginning of February. It was the Wall Street Journal's Invest Live event, and they actually did it, I believe, for the first time ever in West Palm Beach. And during that event, Ken Griffin, who happened to have been born in Florida, and Steve Ross. So Griffin had a very successful hedge fund in Chicago. He moved down here, for those of you who don't know the background. And Steve Ross is in New York, but he also owns a real estate company and owns the Dolphins here in South Florida. So during this Wall Street Journal event, they announced a $10 million initiative for the Florida Council of 100, which is a nonprofit pro-business group that helps bring businesses to South Florida, called Ambition Accelerated. And this is a multi-million-dollar national campaign highlighting Florida's Gold Coast, which is considered Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties, as a center for the next generation of American growth. And I thought that was, to me, it was super interesting because, yes, we've been hearing about how many, ultra high net worth people are moving here from California, from New York, from Chicago, from Boston, from other high tax areas. But, people are saying, oh, well, they're going to go back. The tech talent is still in San Francisco. The money and financial capital is still New York. And Chicago is Chicago. And they've always had great trade and financial institutions, and they're not going anywhere. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. They're all amazing cities. But there is a momentum in Southeast Florida that I think is being driven more by, I'm not sure if it's novelty or excitement or proximity to other capital centers, because let's face it, I love San Francisco. I'm a native San Franciscan, but it's far from everything other than Asia and Hawaii. And then, and obviously New York is New York, and they have the same proximity to things that we have, but they have some political issues. And I think more than the political issues, the thing with New York is just that Florida and New York have always been almost like commuter cities, right? I can get on a plane at 6 a.m. and be in New York for my 10 o'clock meeting, or have dinner, turn around and come back and be at my office the next day. So I look at that more as a commuter route. But what I found super interesting about this event was that these two bigwigs in the real estate, or in the financial industry, I should say, and their love for what's happening in South Florida. Ken Griffin has donated a lot of money on philanthropic things here, including schools and hospitals, etc. And I know Steve Ross I think he's bringing Vanderbilt to Palm Beach. So they're definitely changing, or trying to change, change a lot of the landscape of the Gold Coast from being kind of a retiree, you know, up in Palm Beach, a retiree of the wealthy haven, and, you know, Miami just kind of this cultural arroz con mango that we have down here, and they're trying to make it more credible from a business and tech stance. And I thought it was super interesting because one of the speakers, and I'll get his name in a minute, who spoke at this event made the comment that there are 150 billionaires that live in the state of Florida. Did you know that? I had no idea it was that many. So, 115 billionaires, and that was from the Dow Jones Company CEO Almar Latour, and you know, he said, this is a quote, "So many captains of industry have set up shop in this region: private equity, venture capital, banking, hedge funds, wealth management, and crypto." So that's very diverse, right? Before we were mostly tourist, cruise, import, export. And now we're getting this diversity. So that got me to thinking, you know, we talk about affordability. We already said that affordability is like the word of the year here in Florida. It has been for a long time. It's becoming more so because when these two gentlemen and others like them, we also have Toma Bravo that brought a big part of his tech company from Silicon Valley here back, I think at the beginning of the pandemic. So they're bringing higher paying jobs. They also are coming from an area that is much more expensive from a real estate perspective, but then also from a tax perspective, right? In those states, they're all state taxes and most of the time city taxes on top of that. So I started thinking, okay, how does that play into the affordability issue in this area, right? How does it affect the people who are already here? And I think MJ Green, you know, touched upon it a little bit about, yes, it is a challenge for companies and people that are already here. But if bringing in these people helps to raise our income base, right? Because we've always been on the lower end of the income base. And I remember decades ago when I worked with the school board lobby, you know, I remember Miami-Dade had almost like a price cut for our teachers because they went across the board and they didn't have a percentage it was like a standard of living increase that they paid you. And they're like, well, no, we're not going to pay that in Miami anymore because you guys have the beaches. Well, yeah, anyone who lives in the coast or teaches in the coast has the beaches, but there is an increase in cost of living. So if the salaries go up, technically, then your spending ability goes up and that becomes more affordable. So that's kind of why I started thinking about that. And then how does that affect commercial real estate? We know how it affects residential. Larry Page with Google was just in the paper right after this event because he put, I think, I don't know how many millions, 170 something down on one property in Coconut Grove. And it's weird because I've been in this industry for over 25 years. And I used to work did commercial within one of the luxury residential firms. And we never had sales this high. Like, it's insane, the levels that we're hitting. But it's not a one-off, right? It doesn't appear to be a one-off. And and I thought, well, maybe there, yes, these few people. But now there seems to be almost like a snowball effect. And the fact that Griffin and Ross are really championing it and helping promote it. And one of the questions that's on, I can't remember, it's on the Florida Council of 100's website, but it asks the question, what if your employees made 10% more every year? And they're not necessarily talking about 10% salary increase. They're talking about the taxes that they don't pay to federal and, to state and local municipalities. So that got me thinking again on how that all affects commercial real estate, right? And you think about
but let me just say, because I think it's very important to mention what these two gentlemen said about their program and what those comments say about where Miami has been and South Florida has been and where South Florida is today. Ross was quoted as saying, in previous generations, there were a limited number of American cities where companies could access opportunity and build at scale. That's why I began my career building my business in those cities. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's clear that the next generation of companies belong along Florida's Gold Coast from West Palm Beach to Miami. And he spoke about the competitive advantage of having a strong operating environment, a flourishing innovation ecosystem, and public leadership. And then Ken Griffin says, where you choose to build a business determines how much time is spent driving growth versus navigating bureaucracy, which I think is a big key here, right?
Us, yeah.
Miami and the broader South Florida Gulf Coast offer deep talent, regulatory clarity, and an extraordinary quality of life. These are not secondary considerations. They are foundations for long-term success, and their impact compounds over time. I think that is clearly, we have turned the corner as a region and as a city and as cities in South Florida, where this ambition project is really about attracting capital as a strategy. And what it reminded me of is, when the story has been told about the work of Tony Goldman in growing so many, neighborhoods, right? I remember hearing this from him directly in a conference where he spoke about, you need about 13 other developers that are going to, risk takers that are going to jump into a neighborhood, that are going to also buy into your vision, that are going to come in. And it just feels like this, Ambition Accelerated campaign is about attracting all of those other players that maybe are still considering, do I stay in one of those other cities, or do I come in and make my investment? And I think that is, just says a lot, where we're going to go. The question is, it looks to me that this is really about finance sector, the technology sector, corporate headquarters relocating here, maybe life sciences. So there seems to be that is going to come in. And so to your point about commercial real estate, well, let's go down the list. First of all, we're already the healthiest office market in the country. What does that do?
Well, and Ken Griffin just paid $180 million for 545 Wynn in Wynwood. And that's a totally different demographic from the building that he's building in Brickell, right? Yeah. So one is more tech, young. So he's being very strategic. If you follow where these gentlemen are buying and building real estate, right, they're going cross sectors, right? So I thought that was really interesting. And in terms of office space, they're definitely people that are pro office, right?
Yeah, and I think it's just going to accelerate. This is almost like the equivalent of what happened during the pandemic, which is it accelerated some trends that were already there. And I think there is a trend that evolved out of the pandemic that there was a flight to quality in the office sector, and I think that is going to continue, and that's only going to strengthen. And then the question is, in what areas is that going to concentrate on? Is Brickell, downtown Miami, for Lauderdale CBD, the West Palm Beach,
sure. Wells Fargo's moving their wealth
financial
management
district
division. Now they just announced that last week, I believe.
Yeah.
Where they're moving to Palm Beach.
And so now, are we going to be a region that is also continuing with the theme of the office? It's going to be like a trophy office kind of market, because now that's the other question, right? Mm-hmm. Is everybody going to want to compete with the beautiful building that Ken Griffin is building?
He's building on Brickell, right?
Is everything? Are things not going to be enough? And then what are they going to bring? Yes, they're going to hire locally, but there's going to be, number one, since 2020, we've been at the top of the list for in-migration in the country. What is this going to do to that? When those big, companies begin to relocate, when we become the incubator for innovation, as other states around the nation have, kind of gone the opposite direction that we have done in regards to, pro-business environment and pro-innovation environment, you're going to attract a lot of migration and a lot of talent, right?
Yeah, we ranked third in talent attraction across the nation.
Right. And so, for example, we're talking about commercial real estate. I understand that, but for the last few years, we've been dealing with the effects of the tragedy in Surfside and how the condo market has had to adjust to all the new rules and all the new guidelines. And we've seen condos stay on the market longer. So I'm wondering, number one, this talent migration will likely have an effect in multifamily, but it'll probably have an effect in absorbing some of these units that have been around,
or some of the newer ones that
are being built. That are being built. very true. Are we going to see more Class A multifamily as well in some of those areas, especially when you're coming in and, if you're incubating an innovation company and it's a tech company, usually those people that are working in those companies can't afford to just buy.
Right.
But you're still going to have
and tend to be more mobile anyway. But they also, it's more, and we've talked about this before, it's more going to be the amenities of the neighborhood, hence probably the Wynwood buy, right? Because they have the independent kind of new restaurants and the hip vibe and the music and the comedy clubs and everything that are more down in Wynwood and the Edgewater district, Little River, etc., and Little Haiti.
But how important is also having things like transportation are going to become, right? Because if we talk about an affordability issue, but you're one of the ways to look around that is if you're able to work close to where live close to where you work, and now I don't have to have the expense of a vehicle, and I'm able to transport. There are things, which is why I think it's very smart that cities like South Miami are focusing their attention in that transit corridor, around the station. So this is one of those things where, like the name says, ambition accelerated, but it's also going to accelerate not only the positives, but it's going to accelerate some of the things that we already see as challenges, like
there's
affordability.
There's going to be some short-term adjustment as we go through this next phase of the cycle, for sure. And we are seeing some, locals that have been here generationally that are choosing to leave because of affordability issue down the road with their kids or grandkids.
The question is also if it does transpire in that way. And look, they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're putting $10 million to get it going. The question also is, will an organization like that, and are they going to have an effect on the things that we see as roadblocks right now or challenges, which is permitting and zoning, right?
We sound like a broken record.
Yeah, but permitting and zoning, 18 months to 24 months to get something off the ground. I mean, we live in a society that has a lot of opportunities, a lot of new technological tools to be able to expedite some of these things. And it's really interesting because I understand the idea that a city doesn't want to necessarily create legacy jobs or legacy expenses, right? Just for a blip in the,
Right. And this is where I, South Miami Mayor in our previous episode was talking about how they're using third-party, either tools or companies to assist, but also maybe these people that are coming from other areas that are more legacy cities, right? Like New York, San Francisco, Chicago. I think of their architecture too versus what the Mayor Fernandez was saying about, with Miami, some of these cities had the NIMBYism or the permitting and zoning just took too long that you couldn't build, where before eight stories would have sufficed and would have been enough. Now, just because the value of the land isn't, so now you have to go 16 stories, which really changes the flavor of a neighborhood, 8 versus 6. And you think of all of the cities in Europe, or I'm thinking of San Francisco, I'm thinking of New York with the mixed use buildings and some of the really old buildings that have been there a long time in the activity on the street. And those buildings are still extremely valuable because they've had time to appreciate over time versus what we're having to build now, significantly higher just to justify for the land costs and the permitting time and the cost of construction, et cetera. So I think some of these new people coming in are going to be like, okay, I'm building on Brickell, but not everybody's going to want to live in a Brickell high rise. Not everybody. So maybe we should be doing what Mayor Fernandez recommends about igniting those smaller parcels and smaller developers to go in to build 8-unit building.
And density is not always the answer, because there are ways to activate. And you know what? It's more of a democratizing the opportunity for building wealth as a developer as well, because there are a lot of people that have the ability to do those small projects that, but unfortunately the rules are not in place.
But they can't take 18 months. They can't afford 18 months worth of permitting,
And then you start looking at the way we live our lives today with Amazon packages and the like, and now you start looking at, well, are the values of the last mile industrial property is gonna increase furthermore. How important is that going to be? Are we going to see some of those projects that we've seen, suggested in other places where you're going to have true mixed use, where you're going to have some industrial, and then you're going to have some retail, and then you're going to have some multifamily on top.
Already we've seen that on the transportation corridor, and it's interesting because I met with Rod Caston yesterday from Metro Commercial, and we were talking about, because his firm represents big national big box retailers, and he was talking about how difficult it is to find ongoing locations for them and based on all of their needs. And I said, well, have they started doing like what Publix and Target and some of the places did on Miami Beach, right? Where they started, like Publix built in Sunrise Harbor, the first that I was aware of, Publix, that was 2 stories with very little parking, and you take an escalator up, and now we see Whole Foods and Coral Gables is no big deal. It's on the second or third floor.
There's also one off Miller and 94th.
Right, exactly.
That is 2-story.
So you start thinking about that. And so Rod was saying that he was part of the development that, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name, on Metro, that they did in Coral Gables, right, where I think it might be the link, where Total Wine is, and there's LA Fitness, and and he said, yes, he's seen that, but it's not so easy to do. Like he was talking about, how do you bring in, how do you make sure that those big boxes still have the delivery access for their trucks and the freight elevators that aren't interfering with the residents? And he said the way that they got LA Fitness in there, pretty sure it was LA Fitness, the way that they got their gym in there on the 3rd floor, which they usually don't like, was that all the 3rd floor parking goes directly to the LA Fitness entrance. So anybody going to the gym doesn't have to.
But you're talking the Coral Gables right on US 1? No.
It's the one further down.
Okay, yes.
I want to say
I think it's called the link.
Yeah. So anyway, and that Total Wine does extremely well, right? So, but he said that was super interesting, and he sits on the board of FIU and UF, and he had some of the students come in to see how they were integrating big box retail in a super dense area, and how they still had, how they had to do the separate freight elevators, the separate loading docks, that each person has their own loading with the turnaround ratio. So interesting. So to your point, all of those things are going to be addressed. But I think the fact that these people are here and they have the financial ability and the political savvy and insights from having lived places that have done this before, to help bring that knowledge to change some of the permitting log jams.
I remember having a conversation 10 years ago about whether Miami was a cosmopolitan city and about, what we were missing for growth. And I think that I remember that there was, at that time, a lot of the conversation was like, well, we can never be one of those cities because we don't have a great public transportation system. We don't have a subway system, or we don't have this and that and whatever.
Arts and culture.
Right. And the reality is that I don't think back then the conversation was, well, we have to build it so that they will come.
Right.
And I think things have shifted. I think we may build it after they come.
Right. Well,
because it does feel like that.
I think we built enough to bring them, right?
True.
And now we're going to have to build better and more to keep them.
Yeah.
Right? Because
absolutely.
if not, there's going to be another city who does it. But
but I think at the end of the day, if you look at their quotes, I think a big part of what we built was an environment that was pro-business, an environment that was trying to reduce all of the
bureaucracy.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is just really a tweak of it, if you think of it. This is just tweaking bureaucracies that might be a little archaic, or might not have spent the money on tech, or might not have been looked at differently because they've always done it this way.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting that, in the last 3 years, those 3 counties' GDP has outpaced the nation. Like we've had the highest GDP growth over the past 3 years in just those 3 counties. So I think that's pretty impressive. It speaks a lot for the leadership within those counties. It speaks a lot for the leadership in Florida. And we're still not, wild west of construction or business. We still have a lot of consumer protections.
We do.
We protect the Everglades. We have the urban development boundary line to keep things in check.
We've hundreds of millions of dollars in
infrastructure and water quality and sustainability. And, I know a lot of the naysayers and the poo-pooers are going to be like, oh, but you guys are ground zero for climate change and flood and all that. Those 3 counties, our 3 counties, have the highest construction standards in the United States because we went through Hurricane Andrew. And after Hurricane Andrew, those changed. The rest of the state, not so much. I think there's a lot of work we still need to do in the rest of the state. I don't think anywhere that has hurricanes or fires or floods should be built, below sea level and made out of, plywood. But that's a conversation that needs to be had in those areas. But in terms of the Gold Coast, I have, yes, it makes us more expensive because our standards are higher and our requirements are a lot higher. But, at the end of the day, when a storm's coming through and you don't have to go out there and buy plywood to screw into your windows, I mean, that's a good thing. So, and to your point, the amount of money that's been spent on pumps and drainage and all of that. So, and the 3 counties have done an amazing job at cooperating on all of those things, on transportation, on luring companies here before. It was, Broward versus Miami-Dade versus Palm Beach. Like, we didn't work together. And then I remember the first time everyone really started working together was when we were trying to lure Amazon. And they all got together. They did a joint presentation, and they've gotten together on the sustainability, on transportation, et cetera. So I think that fact, that's why we always refer to this whole Gold Coast area as like the larger Miami metro. But they're really 3 independent counties that work very well together. Well, thank you, everybody. What do you guys think about the Ambition Accelerated?
Well, listen, good luck. I like it. There's a lot that we're going to monitor as to what effect it will have. But I think that, it's really impactful that we've had people that have come in and that have really invested in our communities. And I don't just mean investment from a commercial perspective, but also the amount of money that has come into charities and philanthropic endeavors has been very, very impactful to those people. So,
and look, it creates a ton of opportunity for all of us. So just remember to keep your eyes open, connect the dots, and
absolutely, and keep listening to us. No, thank you so much for listening to Between Two Chairs. Until the next time, bye, Jennifer.
Bye, Fernando.